This is RiverTalks with Jonathan Brush, President and CEO of Unbound.
Okay, this is going to be a bit of a controversial subject. And I realize that there's going to be a lot of people that say that I should not be talking about this and I should not be qualified to talk about this. And I'm going to try to do this with sensitivity. And I'm going to just straight up and say that there are some things that I don't fully understand, don't comprehend about this issue. And I'm admitting that straight up. But there's something that I see again and again in our culture that really bothers me. And as I think about the people I work with, and I think the people that listen to this podcast, there's a perspective here that I want to share. So I think it's really valuable. Just recently, I watched a video, and it was online, and it was talking about how a particular group of people were underprivileged and that the rest of us needed to do something about fixing that gap. And there's a couple different takes I have here. So look, first of all, I just want to straight up say there are people who've are underprivileged in the sense that they have suffered great injustice. They are struggling against odds. They have evil things done against them. And I acknowledge that. And I say that that makes your life harder than mine in some ways. And that this is a problem and it's unfair and it's unjust. And that as a society, we should do whatever we can to address that injustice and fix it. But I will also say that there's not much you can do about that scale of injustice at a personal level. And if you wrap your identity in being the victim and you wrap your identity in getting that all fixed, then it's not that I say that your idealism is wrong. I just want to say practically, you're not going to be able to accomplish much that way. In other words, if you are going to say the reason that I cannot progress is because of this unjust system, that may be functionally accurate and correct, but it also means that you have then surrendered to the inevitable and you will not be able to progress in that system. Instead, you have to do two things simultaneously. You have to state that something is unjust, and you have to work in whatever way you can on a systematic level to do that. And then you have to individually, personally, reject that victim label and step up and do the work and fight against the odds and endure through the hardship anyway. And I would suggest to you that that fulfills your obligation to fight against a systemic injustice, but it also gives you the best possible chance of overcoming that injustice on a personal level. Now, if you know me, if you're watching this video, you know that I don't fit into oppressed groups that are generally talked about, and I'm not claiming to. But I do have an interesting little perspective here, and I'm not claiming it as a victim card. I'm just using it as an example, and this is where it's going to be controversial, and I recognize it's not a perfect example. It's an analogy, and I'm not claiming any kind of victim status here, nor am I equating this with the kind of large-scale prejudice we see in our society. But hear me out for a second. I am a homeschool graduate, and I was homeschooled back in the day when that was very unusual. So when I was homeschooled, it was not unusual at all that multiple times a week, we would have people come up to us because we were, in grocery stores and stuff when it wasn't school hours. And as this was going on, and my mom would explain, and they would say to our face, "That's terrible. You are going to be socially inept. You are going to be a failure. You're not going to be prepared. You won't be able to get a job. You won't be able to go to college. You're not going to get a good education." And I'm not talking like this happened occasionally. I'm talking like this happened several times a week through most of my growing up years. And, did it cost me anything? Well, I don't know. But I'll tell you some things I couldn't do. I was banned from being able to play sports on any, high school sports team or any school sports team and all those kinds of things. So at some level, I had people saying that you would not be able to do the things that you want to do, that you're going to be a social misfit, that you're going to be inept, stupid, too dumb to get into college, a failure, and there are certain things that everybody else can do that you can't do. Now, again, I want to be really careful here, right? I'm not suggesting some sort of systemic injustice in the same way that happens in other phases of our society. But I'm just saying that I'm familiar with being in a situation where people tell you multiple times that you, because of, in my case, the way you were educated, will not be able to do certain things. Now, there were two options available to that. My parents could have railed against this injustice and said, we need to work for a day when homeschoolers are treated like everybody else and are treated like real people and have opportunities available to them and all those kinds of things. And to some extent, I'd say that's true. I certainly would argue that that ought to be the case. We're going to do something else, which is my parents would say, you are going to have to work really hard because we've chosen to do this as a family and we've chosen it for reasons. And here's the reasons. And you're going to have to work hard to overcome these barriers in front of you. And so I didn't think that was an injustice. I didn't think that was a problem. I thought it was a challenge. And so I did work hard and I went to school and, you can judge whether I'm socially inept or something or not. And opportunities opened in front of me. And a lot of the terrible things were predicted didn't come true. Now, I'm, again, being cautious here. I know that's just a tiny piece compared to the large scale prejudices and racism and things like that we see in society. I'm not claiming equivalency, but I am claiming that the principle holds true. I think you ought to speak out against, work against systemic injustice, that we should call it out, that there is a societal responsibility to fix those things. I also think that the best way to fix those systemic injustice is on an individual, day-by-day, personal level. And the best way to do that is to prove the haters wrong. Live your best life. Excel at what you do. Strive for excellence. Love your family. Love your neighbors. Treat everybody as much as possible with respect. Have forbearance. Practice endurance. And treat everybody with as much love and respect as possible. And it's those minute by minute, day by day, week in, week out, year over year things that ultimately completely destroys prejudice, completely destroys injustice. Look, I understand. It's not as satisfying as some instant reckoning of some immediate slap in the face to the evil that's oppressing you. I understand that. But long term, it is more effective. It's the kind of change that seeps in, hardens, sets, and forever changes a culture. It takes a while. It takes endurance. It takes patience. It takes suffering. It takes putting up with injustice. And I understand that that's evil and that's wrong. And yet, if you're willing to do that, despite the odds that are facing you, despite the injustice perpetuated against you, despite the disadvantages that are in your life, that you strive to overcome them anyway, that is the kind of action. That is the kind of endurance. That is the kind of work that fundamentally changes cultures, shifts societies, and straight on addresses and corrects injustice.